Hello, everybody. I'm Rich Garriman. I think most of you have met me. I'm the Executive Director of Safe Passage for Children. And with us is Alicia Jacobs, who is going to be a panelist. And we have another panelist who's having some trouble logging in. So
I don't see my name. I don't see.
There you are. I hear you.
I hear you. Hear me?
There's
Okay.
Naima. All right. We have both our panelists here. You're not showing up yet, but there you are.
Okay.
Okay, we're in business.
Thanks.
So, and this is Naima Broadnax. So
Hi.
Naima and Alicia are two panelists for today. And the topic is adult survivors of child abuse. So what I would like to do is, and bear with me, this involves some technology, which, doesn't always work for me, but I'm going to try to share a brief video with you that Alicia and Naima did with us. They did a much longer video. This is a short version of it to introduce them to you. But first, just let me say, housekeeping wise, you're welcome to keep your camera off or turn it on, whichever way you prefer, but we do like to see you. If you've got, a circus going on in the background, then, you can turn it off, or you don't like to be seen, you can leave it off. Otherwise, we'd love to see you. And of course, if you could please mute until we get to the Q&A period, which we will get to after the panel discussion. And I'm going to be asking Alicia and Naima a few questions, and they'll respond. And then you have the chat function if you want to, put some questions in for me to follow up on, for us to follow up on. So let me see if I get lucky here and share the screen, and we'll get started here. That's not it. That's an extraordinary council meeting. So just bear with me for a minute. I will try to get back to that.
Hi, Rich, this is Stephanie. Is it okay if I talk for a minute?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. I know Rich did a few announcements with you already, but I'll just talk a little bit while he's getting stuff set up. My name is Stephanie McCorkle. I'm the Operations Manager and Volunteer Coordinator for Safe Passage for Children in Minnesota. Thanks a lot again to everyone who's taking their time out of their day to join us. This is a really exciting webinar for us. We're very excited to be presenting it to you and for you to be joining us. Again, you're just tuned into our free webinar, listening to adult survivors of child maltreatment, and you're with Safe Passage for Children in Minnesota.
And Stephanie, I can tell you, I kind of already went over the house rules, and I have been able to find the webinar, the video. So I think we're ready for me just to go ahead unless you have something new.
Why don't you? Nobody has their thing on, just the staff people do. They said put it on if you want, but there's no reason to. All right.
Okay, are you ready then? I didn't mean to cut you off, Stephanie, but I think we're ready to go, if that's all right.
Okay, I just want to remind everyone to mute their microphones until we have our Q&A time.
Yeah. Start it over again. Okay, let's do it.
Okay, here we go.
And it was honorable for a Black man to be raising his daughter by himself. The matter in his personal relationships, and then when there was no woman there, that came to me. It wasn't like an everyday thing, but when it happened, it was severe. Throughout the course of all of this, I began to run away at around 12. When I got a little older, I stayed in the streets. I started to learn what the streets were about and how to survive. Like most runaways, and then it becomes a way of life. Mainly when they did step in, it was to penalize me. I actually got a ticket for being a habitual runaway, and then they sent me back to a dysfunctional home.
Oh, sorry. Hold on a sec.
there was an incident where it escalated like 1,000 times, where it went to kicking and punching. And that's when I was thrown across the room and my hip began to dislocate after that incident. There was a major effort that had to take place for me to go into foster care, despite all of the evidence and the signs of abuse.
I survived 17 years of severe child abuse. Everybody loved my mom. On the outside, she always made sure that everybody thought we had the perfect life. She had driven me to a local park and taken me into a bathroom and put a gun to my head, and she had asked me to give her one reason that I should live.
Give her what?
My best friend had told my counselor at school, and then because it was so drastic, the counselor then had to bring in the police. And at that point I was scared because I had previously turned in my mom multiple times. The first few times I was 100% honest about everything. Like, I could nail down every single bump, bruise, scratch, scar, everything. The system wasn't able to do anything to help me. And so I had to go back home. And every time I went back, it would be worse for telling, for sharing that. Or in her words, I was humiliating her and making her look bad. At the time, I think that they were always trying to do what's best for the family. And for me, in that case, what was best for the family wasn't what was best for me. And I stopped sharing. I stopped.
So she beat
I'm
her.
just going to start over. I realized there wasn't sound for part of it.
Honorable for a black
Was she
man.
physically abusive to this girl, to her daughter?
Apparently.
Is there a way to mute all the participants? I'm hearing feedback and it's really distracting.
Relationships.
Yeah.
And then when that dysfunctional home repeatedly. So they just caused the cycle to go over and over and over again. There was an incident where it escalated like 1,000 times, where it went to kicking and punching. And that's when I was thrown across the room and my hip began to dislocate after that incident. There was a major effort that had to take place for me to go into foster care, despite all of the evidence and the signs of abuse.
I survived 17 years of severe child abuse. Everybody loved my mom. On the outside, she always made sure that everybody thought we had the perfect life. She had driven me to a local park and taken me into a bathroom and put a gun to my head, and she had asked me to give her one reason that I should live. My best friend had told my counselor at school, and then because it was so drastic, the counselor then had to bring in the police. And at that point I was scared because I had previously turned in my mom multiple times. The first few times I was 100% honest about everything. Like, I could nail down every single bump, bruise, scratch, scar, everything. The system wasn't able to do anything to help me. And so I had to go back home. And every time I went back, it would be worse for telling, for sharing that. Or in her words, I was humiliating her and making her look bad. At the time, I think that they were always trying to do what's best for the family. And for me, in that case, what was best for the family wasn't what was best for me. And I did. I stopped sharing. I stopped reaching out. I stopped telling people what's going to happen when the system won't help me. And then I have to go back, like, am I actually going to die this time? Like those are thoughts that would go through my head. So the system wasn't able to work for me, but that doesn't mean that we can't make it work for somebody else.
I would always want young people to know that they have rights. And I would like them to know that they deserve every bit of what everybody else has.
If I'm able to be part of an organization that's able to speak out and stop other people that treat their children like that, that's something I want to be part of.
So I just really love that their effort is to make concrete changes within the law. It's amazing.
Well, thank you. I apologize for the technical problems. I hope most of you got most of that. I think you can see, what, tremendous respect that we have for Alicia and Naima, because they have helped us several times with these kinds of presentations, and it takes a lot of courage. I get emotional every time they talk. I know they do as well. So what we wanted to do is just have a frank and honest discussion about how the system treats children. Unfortunately, things have not changed very much since those days. And so a lot of what Alicia and I are going to say today still applies, even though they're now adults. So
make the system work. Welcome everyone to the inaugural refurbished.
Sorry guys.
Meeting in these chambers. Can I ask that
just bear with me a minute. I'm going to have to shut off the.
Nobody is to move. We are under COVID-19 restrictions and protocols. Councillors will not be required to stand, and as such, everybody will remain seated.
I'm sorry, I don't know how to shut off that. Oh, here.
Thank you, Councillor.
Okay, there we go. I think we're back. Again, apologies for the technology. So are we all here? So what I wanted to do is ask each of you if there's anything else you want to share about your experience with a child that wasn't touched on in the video.
Do we still have Naima, or is
Yes, she's here. Yeah, you're there.
Yep. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, it says, okay. Alicia, that you're muted. Why don't you go first, Naima, because I think Alicia is muted.
Okay. Which question are we starting?
Well,
on?
I was going to say, is there anything else you wanted to share about your experience as a child and that wasn't covered in the video?
Well, they didn't hear the video about me very much, so I will go back over that a little bit. From a young age, there were police calls in our house about child abuse. And as it relates to the bill, there were many times the police never pulled me to the side and asked me or interviewed me about what was going on. I was always asked with the parent in the next room glaring at me, similar to domestic situations that still go on, or in child protection where the parent is kind of looking at you across the room like you better not say anything. And so that's been going on for years. And then it continues in foster care. In foster care, when you have quarterly reviews where the caseworker comes out and the rep comes out from the agency they all meet with you in the same room. There's never a time or an evaluation on paper where you're allowed to give private feedback. You have to go to counseling and do something like that. But when I looked back over my county chart, those case meetings were a big distress to me as I read my attitude and demeanor as a youth and the way they would write about me. It was clear that those were uncomfortable situations for me in foster care. And so I learned to address that pretty young after I got out of foster care, because I just think it's a gross violation to make an abused young person have the courage to say something in front of the abuser. I mean, that just doesn't compute with me. So those are kind of some of the similar things that I had. And then it took a lot of severity for me to get into foster care. You have some cases where kids are snatched out of the home with very little evidence or incident. And then there's my case where it took a permanent lifelong injury to remove me and put me in foster care. It took me to be on the run with a bad hip for 3 months and refusing to come out of the street to go to foster care. Not only did it take that, I had to get an attorney from Legal Aid, Irene Upsall, and an advocate, Pat Bellinger. So I needed a Native American attorney, advocate, and I had an attorney. And I had to also find my birth mother. So it took drastic measures for the county to go, oh, wow. And here I'm facing double reconstructive hip surgery. So I'm the highest risk foster care you can be in. And that's what it took to get into foster care for me. And that's why it made news, because it didn't make sense and it was outrageous what I had to go through. And then the monitoring and the journey through foster care for someone crippled was not conducive to them getting paid $100 a day. So we have a lot of work to do.
And I want to highlight that you actually had to work to get into foster care. And I think the official kind of view of the world is that children don't want to go into foster care, but you're one of a number of people I've talked to over the years who actually took the initiative to get into foster care. And then that wasn't great either.
No.
So.
But when they said that I would have to be in a body cast, I ran away again for the last time. I said, I'm not going to be in a full body cast. And that's where the county should have stepped in and said, well, there's record of abuse here, and this medical, they should have charged. Matter of fact, my father should have been charged, but they didn't even go that far into the legalities of being thrown across the room and now being crippled for life.
Right. So unfortunately, things haven't changed. So before I ask Alicia the same question, I just want to point out, many of you know this, but that our legislation that we've been promoting, last year and this year is to, among other things, require that foster children who are 4 years and older be interviewed separately from the foster parents. And along those lines, I track child fatalities, at least the ones reported in the media, and 25% of them have been in foster care in the last 3 years, foster care, kinship care, and as to not, compared to none before that. And another provision in our proposed legislation is to interview children separately from the adults in the household, whoever they may be, the parents and any other adults, during the initial child protection visit. So here we are, however many years later, and those are still issues. So So Alicia, can I ask you the same question? Fill in the blanks again. My apologies about the technology. It didn't all work, but I think we got most of both of you in at some point or another, I hope. So anything else you want to add, Alicia, in terms of your story?
Yeah, so with my story, it's a little bit different than Naima's, as like I never entered into foster care. And I'm just gonna apologize in advance because this is always challenging to talk to people about. But it was really challenging for me because, like in the video you guys had seen, I had tried turning in my mom multiple times. But when you, like the first few times I mentioned, I did talk about like bumps, bruises, scrapes, and stuff like that. Because you're hopeful. Like when you first start reaching out, you're hopeful, like this is gonna change, you know, this isn't gonna be forever. And after the first couple times, you know, within the first couple times, you know, they'd ask, you know, my sister and my dad, like, is this going on at home? And they, of course, would be like, no, this isn't happening, because, you know, we're all kind of, you know, we're family. There is that sense of nurture and love that you want to hold on to. And I don't want to speak for them, but from my perspective, I just really felt like, you know, they wanted to keep us all together and that things would work out. And in a sense, they were also being kind of mentally manipulated by her over time, and it just got stronger and stronger. And so later on, I had incidences would progress, and I had the gun incident and whatnot, and then police were involved. But every time I sat down and I talked to police about things, either yes, my parents would be around and then I would be too scared to say something, or I had said something in the past and gone home and things didn't get better, they got worse because I was bringing up those things. And then there was a point that I wanted to say, but my emotions are kind of making me crazy. So I just find it to be rather challenging that when I did bring it up and we did have a social worker come to the house, there was either a miscommunication or no communication between the police and the social workers showing up at my house, or there wasn't documentation, like something wasn't connecting the dots, because my mom was very manipulative, that when I was at home and someone would come to the door or whatnot, or they knew we had an appointment, like she would prep us. She would clean the house. She would make sure, like, you know, a couple days before, like we had ice packs over our bruises, trying to clean stuff up. Like it was all like this pre-planned thing. And it even was to the point where some days, like, she would be mad at me. Or actually there was the one time, I will say, police did come by, but it was unaware. I think maybe a neighbor had called or something. And I was in a shed, locked in a dirty shed. And before she allowed the police to come in, she had my sister come get me and then come inside to act like nothing was happening. So the visual that they're getting when my parents are around and with them having notice is not what was really going on. And so there's some sort of disconnect. And Naima was talking about looking at records. I had gone back when I was 18 and I went to the county to print out all my reports from when I had turned in my mom. And in all the reports that they could backdate to, they weren't documenting like every scrape, bruise, scar that I talked about initially, but they were documenting that I was scared, that nothing, you know, they felt that they were on my mom's side with, you know, I'm just a rebellious child and trying to get back at my parents. And so somewhere there's this communication that is not connecting. And I don't know if it just has to do with us needing, I mean, I think it's more than us having parents out of the room, but I think that's the first step in the right direction.
Yeah, go ahead, Naomi. You were kind of leaning in there. Yeah, thank you, Alicia.
No, I'm just supporting and agreeing with you, honey, that yes, that doesn't make sense. It's not fair. I would even say a different location. So the child isn't scared to death. And you talk, like she said, the prepping that the parents have time to do. Not if you did pop-up visits. No way would a parent be able to prep a situation. And of course, if you have, I don't know about her particular situation, but if you have a parent who is getting assistance, they're more likely to do something like that because they don't want their assistance cut off. That happened to my dad. His assistance was cut off when I went to foster home and his Section 8. And so you got parents who will think financially about this, not even legally, because we know the county isn't into pressing too many charges against child abuse. And that has to change also. Her mom should have faced many legal challenges as well as my dad should have.
And from the reports that I had printed out, there were a minimum of 5 reports, and one of which had also included the gun to my head scenario. And you would think that at some point, if they're not connecting the dots, that, you know, things keep escalating, like, wouldn't we take an extra effort or an extra look or try to figure out what's wrong? But instead, like, I didn't have that luxury, and I wasn't confident enough in, and I don't want to say necessarily for you, Naima, but I wasn't confident enough to be able to find an attorney and all this stuff to try to get myself out of there. So kudos to you for being able to find that strength.
Yeah. I think that was just the lack of options though, because for all of you who work in the system, let me just paint the picture. For 3 months, I tried to do it what you all call the right way, where you call your social worker, you call your school guidance counselor, you call your therapist, which was David Sanders at the time, you call your whole team, because that's what they give you when they send you home is a list of your team. And then when you so-called get in crisis again, you're supposed to call that team up and they're supposed to be there. Oh no. No. It's like there's a limit to the crisis that they're gonna be there for you as a team. And then you're on your own and you're up against the wall. And that's why they're homeless, because they're going, do I wanna get hit every day? Or like she said, the guns, the living with weapons. Do I wanna be homeless or face a gun to my head? And if that's the choice the county is leaving the kids, what kind of society are we gonna have? I mean, look at what's going on now.
You know, I don't think most people, you know, I talk to lots of people and do presentations. Most people don't believe it. They don't believe that the response of the system is so heavily weighted towards the parents. But it is, and you're giving personal testimony to that effect. And what'll happen is if you talk to a legislator who's been prepped by the Department of Human Services, or you talk to anybody in the system, they'll say, well, but the trauma of removing children from their homes is so great that, you know, we should almost always leave them there. But I think you've kind of shared why there's a point at which that isn't true.
Correct.
Which, I mean, I do want to make a statement. Like, I believe, even though I didn't witness it, that there is trauma, that there probably is when you are separated from your parents. I only say that because as an adult, I still craved that family relationship, that grounding, that connection, that wanting to belong, wanting to be loved. from them. So I can see that perspective, but I think that there is more that needs to be done, because we can't just rely on a happy, perfect family all the time. There are multiple dynamics, and we're seeing that more and more as, you know, we're kind of progressing, even just during COVID, that there's so much dynamic, and we need to address it all, but be understanding of all perspectives at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I just want to be clear that it's not, Safe Passage position isn't that you kind of willy-nilly remove kids and put them in foster care, but there's a lot of tools that you can use to hold parents accountable before you get to that point. And there are those techniques like getting the facts and not just sitting the kid down in front of everybody, so you can get a better handle on what's going on and figure out what's serious. But if you have a situation where, you know, your hip is permanently damaged, you had a gun to your head, there's, you know, something needs to be done. And what has been done in your case and many is to say, oh, well, put them back home.
Well, can I address the family assessment piece of this?
Please go ahead, yeah.
Which we haven't brought up yet.
Can you say what it is for people who aren't familiar?
Okay, well, let me make sure I got an up-to-date version. That the family assessment is what they do, I believe, once you're out of the home, and then they make an assessment about sending you back to the home.
No, technically the family
right?
assessment is, it's the kind of, I call it the child protection light, which is, okay, you've gotten into child protection and now we're not going to interview anybody. We're not going to ask questions. We're not going to do collateral contacts. We're just going to go in and offer services. And of course, they're not going to get the information they need to protect children. So you're talking, I think, about a social work assessment, a casework assessment after you've been in the system a while. So go ahead.
Well, I want to refer to the one connected to the bill about, and make sure we're clarifying, is this to determine whether to take a kid out of the home? The one that's connected to the bill?
Well, yes, basically, if you do a fact-finding process, it could end up with the kid being removed, but it could end up with services and some kind of accountability, like say a safety plan where you bring somebody in so that, yeah.
Okay, so what I want to say about that, because what I want to say, that's been around since I was born. So I'll throw it out there, 75. All right. I have my first county court appearance at 1976, where my mom terminated her parental rights. At that point, there's a note in that court order for the county to continue to do assessments, which they never, ever came back to our home after that court order to do not one family assessment. And then, like Alicia said, when I started reaching out around 10, so that puts us about 9 years later, there was still no connecting of the dots from the original 1976 court order, family assessments required. Now we get police calls. There was no connecting the dots. I go into the system, St. Joe's, still no connecting of the dots in these assessments. They're nowhere to be found until you actually get your first court appearance in the system, and they're trying to figure out what to do with you. And then once that first assessment comes out and they order your parent to go get counseling or parenting classes, the ball is dropped again. So I just wanted to put a highlighter on this family assessment piece, that I feel it's so critical to get this right, because this stays in your file. And now in the information age we live in, that assessment should connect the dots with the school, the therapist, the police. I mean, that is a critical piece of documentation that needs to happen and be updated or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. So I wanted to follow up on something. Both of you went back as adults or young adults to look at your case files. And I'm curious as to what you were looking for. What did you expect or hope to find from that process?
Oh, man.
It's a loaded question.
Oh.
Why did you do it? What were you thinking?
Do you want to go first or what? What?
No, I don't know. That's a lot to think about, I guess.
Okay. Well, as you saw in the news articles, I started working with foster kids right after I got out of foster care. Right after I got out of foster care, David Sanders, who was my psychologist, actually became the county administrator and began to slash all of the foster care programs that we had. That included all of our support groups, sex ed, independent living, where we learned how to find apartments and get on our own, where we learned how to find a job. From the very inside of Hennepin County, they slashed, and our wings is what I call programs, was our wings, and said they couldn't afford to rehabilitate us anymore. So from that point on, I start picking up and running programs myself. And that's what caused me to go back and look in my file is when I joined a social work shadow program. And I started noticing the negligence. I'm talking pure negligence on these files from the social worker, not keeping up with the filing of their medical insurance, not reporting sexual abuse and the findings from the medical community, not keeping family assessments accurate and up to date, not holding parents accountable, continuing to send the kids back home to the same situations that had never changed. So we had repeat runaway, repeat. The kid is not going to stay there. So after seeing the behind the scenes, which is an eye opener for a kid who was needing a lifeline, now I get to look behind the scenes and I say, what a hot mess. Here I was relying on these people to save my life. What a hot mess this is. And that's when I ordered my file and I said, wow, glad to make it out of this mess by the grace of God.
Yeah.
Glad to make it out. I don't know how we did it other than God, because the system is set up for us to go right to prison.
Well, that's an unusual kind of experience to go and be able to check out your case file and see and what a perspective it gave you. And Alicia, what were you hoping to find when you went and looked at your case file?
I think I have a very different path than Naima did, because I really admire her for kind of working in the field and helping kids, foster kids and stuff like that. But for me, it was more of a personal thing. So I actually wasn't able to get out of my house until I was 16, about 17, and I just randomly moved in with someone else. But during that time, until I graduated, I would my mom had gotten a restraining order against me from seeing my sister and my dad, or at least I was told. If that was the case, I didn't know how to check it back then. But I wanted to be able to kind of get my sister out of that scenario. And I was like, there's got to be evidence in these case files that can at least let me help my sister get out. And because at the time when I had gotten out of school, I wanted to work in social work so I could, be that difference. So when I saw all of the case files and all the information that was missing, I was just like heartbroken, like I had no leverage to be able to be like, see, like, this is what happened, because they didn't document everything. And it was just very disheartening, and still is very disheartening.
Well, speaking of still, is there anything about making the transition to your adult life and how this has affected you and how you've kind of dealt with it as you've become, obviously, both of you successful adults.
For me personally, I think it was really, it probably was challenging until the last couple years, if I'm being completely honest, because I think this coming year, it'll be 20 years that I've been out and thriving, and it's still a struggle. Like you can tell, I still get super emotional about it, but when I first moved out and I was on my own, I didn't have any direction. I didn't think I was going to be alive to make it past high school. And so you take someone who has no adult guidance and no family members, because we were so estranged because our mom had kind of kept us on our own. Granted, there were people that wanted to reach out to us, but I didn't know that at the time. Family members that wanted to reach out, but I didn't know that at the time. And so I felt super alone. And the only thing that I thought that I could do to provide housing and finances and create a family of my own was to join the military, which I did. And I loved it and it fulfilled me in a lot of ways. But still, as I look back at my life throughout college, because I put myself through college and into my first marriage, I think I kept surrounding myself with other people who had families and friends, because I didn't have the confidence to be able to build my own family and build my own friendships with people, because I felt I wasn't good enough. That's what I was always told. Like, I was scum. I didn't belong to be part of the family. Nobody loved me, like all those things. And it just subconsciously, even though I was a very optimistic, super outgoing person, subconsciously, those things really weighed on me. And even in my late 20s, and my sister was starting to have kids because we started to kind of reconnect, but she was always told that I wanted nothing to do with them. So she never reached out to me until she was in her 20s. And when she reached out to me, I was nervous. Like when she was having kids, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't be too excited when I'm around her kids, because she's going to think that like I'm going to steal her kids from her, or she won't let me, like, I'm nervous to ask if I can be alone with them, because is she going to think I'm going to hurt them the way that mom hurt us? Like these things would go through my head, things that someone shouldn't have to worry about. And then you know, in my relationships, I again was with people that had families already or had kids already. And it wasn't until about 2 years ago where I was like, you know what, like I am strong enough and confident in where I'm at right now that like I can do this. And that's kind of been my struggle. So for anyone out there who has gone through like child abuse, I just want you to know, like, this struggle probably won't 100% ever go away, but like you can make it through and you're totally worth it. And, you know, I mean, I'm still here and I'm speaking to you guys because it's important for me, but it still hurts. The pain doesn't go away. You don't forget it, but you can forgive and you can move on and make better of what you have. So that's where.
And I would say, I would add a different adult experience, that I'm a Black Indian, as you can see. That means I face all the disparities that you can possibly face, from being a woman, Black, Native, living over North, come out the system. So when I say survivor, boy, that encompasses a lot. And I'm a parent of a young Black man. And once again, I get a behind the scenes look at something else, which is raising a young Black child in this society we're in with trauma, and working through your trauma while learning to be a parent with no parents, because you're reaching for straws when you're grew up in the system, and you're clawing up a hill to not make the same mistakes like she just described. So when you become a parent, that's all highlighted. Okay, when your kid is getting suspended or when they're doing crazy things and you don't have no more tools, you are subject to repeat cycles. And so for me, it's been a long journey of healing to not repeat cycles, and a lot of giving back to foster kids to remember, because I have a saying, like, I could be your president tomorrow, but I'm still a foster kid. I'll always be a foster kid no matter what I become as an adult. I could be a millionaire. I'll still be a foster kid though. Like, that connection never dies. And there's a whole underground world of us that people want to ignore. We call systems kids. And I encourage everyone to continue this fight. I don't care if it's 1 hour a month or a day. Your contribution is huge, whatever it is, because this is a society of lost and underground kids that are going to become adults. And that affects all of us. And the changes that we can make for them are simple. They don't cost billions and billions and billions of dollars to hold Hennepin County and Ramsey County accountable. What they need are just people that understand this is a war going on in this system, and keep fighting at it. Like she said, we might never win this fight. This has been going on a long time. And maybe we never can get rid of child abuse, because we certainly, we know the system isn't putting money into education. They're certainly not putting money into infomercials and awareness. They're certainly not putting money into program and crime prevention and parenting classes and counseling. So we see that there's really no concern for this other than when it's costing taxpayers money. And that level of consciousness has got to change, because again, these are easy solutions. Letting foster kids know they have a bill of rights, making Hennepin County pay for college. How do they snatch kids out of the home and don't send their own kids to college? They're a terrible parent too. And they're not the answer. So I just say, now as a parent, looking at this system and how they treat us as Black people, you're subject to 10 times more scrutiny than everyone else when you're dealing with the school system or caseworkers. They're quicker to call on you and say, oh, did you spank your kid? So you've got the perspective of the kids where they're focusing on kids that aren't being abused instead of focusing on the ones that are. That is an intentional setup in the system where there's racism, and that has to change. And the racist component of this has to be addressed and not kept being swept under the rug. I know racism is hard to talk about, but if I could encourage people, be comfortable with those conversations and let's keep having them, because racism is a big part of this system.
So I hear you saying two things which people think are contradictory, but there's extra scrutiny and more likelihood of getting pulled into child protection as a Black parent. And at the same time, all of your experiences of not being addressed, not being brought into your parents not being brought into the systems. And in my experience working with government programs over the years, when things are out of whack, they're out of whack in all directions at the same time. It's not just like in one direction. Well, let me open it up, because you know there's a great flow here, but I want to open it up and give other people a chance to ask questions or discuss it. But I do want to give one kind of announcement thing first, which is, we've been talking for several years at Safe Passage about whether we can put together support groups for adult survivors of child abuse. And if anybody is interested either in working on that with us or being a part of such a group, which would be a support group for adult survivors, if you can just put it in the chat, just to me, not to the whole group. And we'll just see. We don't have the resources to do it now, but if there was some interest, it would give us some ammunition to go and maybe try to get a grant or try to find a super volunteer who would be willing to take it on. So if you're at all interested either in helping to put that together or being a part of a support group for adult survivors, just please share that in the chat function just with me. So let me open it up and see what kind of questions or comments people may have. Feel free, anybody, to, and my name is, yeah, I guess I show a Safe Passage for Children of Minnesota. So that's where you want to send an individual message. So thank you. Okay, so anybody want to just ask questions? Greg, now let me just introduce Greg. Greg Gardner is a board member and was a supervisor in child protection in Hennepin County for many years. So
Years to be exact.
how many did you
Just to clarify, in terms of the legislation that Safe Passage is supporting, the family assessment part of that is specific to the assessment part of the child protection process. So when you're talking about when a report first comes in, Minnesota has a 2-track system, either a traditional investigation or a family assessment. So the importance of, for child safety, interviewing the children separate from the parent and not giving notice has to do with that front end. When a new report comes in and the county is charged with the responsibility of trying to sort out if there's validity to the report or not, and what kind of services, if any, are needed for the family. And kind of dovetailing with that, earlier when there was a comment about how the child protection oftentimes, is too weighted towards the family. It's interesting how, from my experience over the 40 years I worked in the system, you get the pendulum effect. And part of the reason that family assessment developed in the 1990s was because people felt that the child protection system was too tilted or too favored towards children, in that child protection always believed the children but never believed the parents. And now there are other reasons that family assessment developed as well, but that was one of the motivating forces for family assessment, was to shift more towards a family-focused approach as opposed to a child-centered approach, which I personally think was a mistake, but that's beside the point.
Good history, though.
And we also got one comment about family assessment, that it's where you get a, basically get a report, you put it in the family assessment track, and you get 5 days to go out, and then you do what's called a whole family interview, which is what we've been talking about. You interview the whole family together instead of the child separately. You were going to say something, Naima, I think it was.
Oh, no, I was just saying, thank you for that history. I didn't know that. Do you know when that changed? What about?
Around 2000-ish, right?
The pendulum started swinging in the 1990s. In the early 1990s is when they went from the finding being either yes or no to adding the third category of unable to substantiate. And then in the mid 1990s, the alternative response pilot project started. And then by around 2000 is when it became embedded in statute in Minnesota, and it got changed from alternative response to family assessment.
Okay.
So other questions and comments? Anybody want to jump in? And
It looks like we have some written on the side. The first question, I'll just read aloud.
Can everybody see that? I didn't realize that. Sorry.
I didn't even listen.
No, it's okay. I'll read the question aloud. It says, would you, Alicia and Naima, recommend a home visitor program to at-risk new mothers with biweekly visits for the first 3 years of a new child's life?
That's intense. I would say narrow that down a little bit, but I I guess would we call those well check visits? Yes, would be good. When you have single parents, especially who've, like we heard a case recently about a mom whose child was killed in the babysitter's hands. So when you're looking at foster kids becoming parents, where do they get those skills? So yes, that program would be good to help not just foster kids who are emancipated, but all people. But we're looking at trauma and at-risk young adults here. Definitely should have a program like that that prevents the cycle from continuing, because you see a lot of that cycle continuing. Someone will get out of foster care, become a parent, and then they have an open case shortly thereafter. So yeah, I think that program, but I don't know if 3 years, that's pretty intense. So.
Yeah, and I think you're probably the best person to answer that because you've experienced more children within that process. The next question I think might be something that you have experienced. I haven't experienced it because I haven't been around enough, but it says also, have you encountered very poor literacy among harmed kids within your experience?
Yes. So I used to do speaking on the school system and kids in the system. So yes, education is poor because when you go into St. Joe's, or when you used to, there was no tracking system of your schooling. So I went from St. Joe's to Willow Street. They no longer exist. You stay there 3 months. I got locked up in Little Sand for about 2.5 years. I stayed in another place for a while, JDC in between. When you get kids who going through the system, there was never a collective. So you get out of the system, your education is pretty battered. It's pretty battered. If you can do math and read and get a job, you're doing pretty good, but it's pretty battered. I mean, look at the education of the kids who've been at home going through the system and they have an achievement gap.
Right. So, yeah, that's helpful. I just wanted to share a comment about the use of the term foster kids, and, you know, is there a better term to use? And I want to give a shout out to a relatively new organization called Foster Associates, Foster Advocates, I mean, which is a young man named Wong Murphy, who was a foster child. And that's the term he uses, is fosters. He just calls kids fosters, and he's doing some great work with kids who are in the system or recently been in the foster care system. So you might want to look up Foster Associates, that person, because they're doing some excellent work. And I don't want to take up much time, but some of you know that the way I got into this field is I worked with street kids and runaways for a number of years in Boston, and then did some community organizing. But I saw the kinds of things, you know, firsthand that Naima is talking about. I knew hundreds of kids in those types of situations. And, you know, the way we did it, this wasn't like handing out toothbrushes under a bridge to kids. This was intervening and getting kids off the street and taking them away from pimps and drug dealers. And, you know, you would be out in the street without a safety net like a kid, in the sense that you didn't have cops and you didn't have a nice office you went to where you could hide out. You were out there in the mix. And so I got a pretty good look. And that's what motivated me to do the work.
And if I could touch on the name piece, I mean, I think that's great, but a name is powerful. And that's why they're not recognized, because there's all kind of names: foster kids, street kids. In the Black community, like to call each other cousin, so that kid doesn't feel left out. But without identifying the fact that these are foster kids, or whatever you want to call them, that they're system kids, though, that's the difference. That needs to resonate, because because when you're in a setting, when you're talking about the school system and you're looking at Why are these kids over here in this classroom acting up? 9 times out of 10, them are foster kids. When you look at gang members, all of my associates as a gang member were foster kids. But a lot of times they don't want to connect those two pieces to crime when you're looking at young Black men dying in the streets. When you're looking at statistics of offenders in prison, they don't want to connect the fact that system kids are set up for failure, like I was mentioning earlier. Part of that is because, in my opinion, like he was saying earlier, Greg was saying, when they switched over to being parent heavy, basically the kids are a pawn, if you ask me, in terms of being there to really create jobs for people, because they're not really being rehabilitated to be successful adults. They're being used as financial pawns. So when we talk about a part of what you were saying in the panel is what will we say to kids, or what's our advice to kids, which is to all of you. Foster kids need to understand they have a Bill of Rights. And I would like to see some movement on getting them those Bill of Rights, because they don't know they have a right to see their file like me and Alicia did. They don't know they have a right to fire that ridiculous social worker. They don't know they have a right to foster care standards, food, clothing, the way of living. They have no idea they have any rights. And I'd like to see that changed.
Well, that's interesting. Maybe that's something we can work with foster associates on. I know we've gone an hour and some people may have to drop off, but I think we can probably go another 15 minutes. I think we left 15 minutes extra for this one because we knew it would go. And I just want to say, Alicia and Naeem have helped us with, to meet with legislators, and we're going to be doing a lot of work between now and the next legislative session to get that bill over the final hurdles. And if any of you are interested in helping us with that, and I would extend a particular invitation to people who have been children in foster care themselves or have been closely associated, because your stories make a way bigger impact than certainly, me or Greg going in there. So I want to invite you to, let us know if you're interested in helping us. We're going to be pushing that bill from now until it didn't get through all the gates this year, all of the committees it had to, but we got a lot of momentum compared to previous years. So please work with us if you have an interest between now and when we're going to make that hopefully final push next February.
And I think there's another question that someone had written that we hadn't gotten to yet.
Go ahead.
And that one says, what things can a child protection worker do to make a child feel comfortable to tell them about the abuse going on? I heard you both mention that you want to ensure kids are interviewed separate from their parents. Is there anything else? I feel like you both were saying being interviewed as a child in another room from the parent, that it was still a little too risky or scary to share the truth.
So I would say the part of my story, I don't know if you all caught, when I was 12, my dad had threatened to kill me. And so that is what caused me to leave home at 12. That was 1988. Because I felt he meant it, because he had also made that threat to previous girlfriends. So I took it serious. And so when you're, and then when you're looking at Alicia's story about being locked in sheds and guns to your head and a manipulative parent, my parent was manipulative too. So as a social worker, I don't want to put you down, but what I want to say is that some of this stuff is ugly and they don't teach it to you in school. So the first thing I always would encourage social workers is don't be arrogant. Don't think you've got the answers. Some of this stuff is ugly. When you go into these homes, you're going to see some ugly stuff. and you got to humble yourself and not make prejudgments. And yes, take the kid out the home because you might be in danger too. My dad ran off social workers. They quit. That still, unfortunately, didn't trigger them to do anything. But what good, how can the kid feel comfortable and secure with you if you're shaking in your boots? So the best thing to do is try to meet that kid in a neutral place where you and that kid is safe from guns and crazy parents, at school, at the counselor. Particularly, it makes sense to be around people who would document, crisis intervention counselors. And there should be people set up already, ready to take statements. It shouldn't be really just on the social worker, if you ask me. So the other thing is having the ability to relate to youth, giving them a reassurance. Sometimes social workers are so out of touch, especially with cultural dynamics, that they don't give the impression that they can help you, because you're like, what is this white first year social work lady from Augsburg gonna tell me? I'm a gang member, for crying out loud. So I thought at 16, what's this lady gonna tell me? What's she gonna do for me? Offer me a ride? Give me a bus card? This woman hasn't even bit more walked in my shoes. She hasn't been shot at. She hasn't lived in these streets. She hasn't had no one punch her in the face. So youth need to, I can't tell you how to do this. It comes with time and skill, but the ability to communicate with your body language and your mouth that I get you, I'm here for you, I'm here to help you, and I'm going to do something about this. It's all nonverbal. It's in your body language. It's in your posture as a social worker. Kids know when you're scared. They know when you are acting feeble and out of touch. So even if you've never been in this community or this culture before, it's up to the social worker to broadcast that this is my job and I'm here to fact find and I'm here for you. And when kids get that sense from you that you're offering some protection, they will open up, they will reach for you.
I would have to completely agree with, for sure, that last part really strongly, because it is very, like, first off, for anyone who has kids, I don't have kids, but I have nieces and nephews, and you can tell they know more than you know at times, because they can feel things, they can sense that energy. So a lot of it really is your experience, your time of, you know, dealing with different situations and whatnot. But like with my scenario, when we had social workers come to the house, or I had to talk with someone at a police station, I never felt comfortable, because I felt like they were standing, it almost felt like they had this preconceived notion already of what I was and who I was and what they wanted, how they wanted to respond and how they wanted to react. The one social worker that actually made an impact in my life and gave me hope and really helped me through high school and whatnot is the one that said, hey, I will listen. I won't take action unless you want me to take action. And would tell me, like, you know, we can't do anything or say anything to anyone because we don't have enough evidence. So it's not worth putting your life at risk to bring it up to somebody. And that same social worker, she didn't just stop being my social worker when I left that school. Even though her rights didn't allow her to be my social worker, she never left me. She talked to that next school. She made sure that communication kept flowing. She made sure that that principal and everyone knew what was going on in my house and how they could help me get through, and when was a good time to reach out and actually bring police and stuff involved, when it would actually make a difference rather than making me suffer in between more than I already was. It's having that person that's going to be there and not leave you, that's going to listen, and that is going to just bring you forward in life. It really, and it's experience and not giving up on you, having someone you can always look to. Because even when I was in my 20s, I went back to her to let her know like how I was doing, because when you're that young and you have so many people that are adults saying, no, this isn't happening, or this person, you know, is a liar or a runaway or defiant against their parents, all you want is someone to trust you, someone to believe in you, to give you that hope.
Yes.
And I don't know if that's a great answer or if that gives you what you need, but it really, it's a personality thing. A lot of it is.
And I'll co-sign that. The social worker who fought for me is still in my life all these years later. That's Pam Russ. And I talked to her the other day. Social workers can make a huge impact on how we turn out. Really.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that, because I think our last conversation, I got the impression that there might not be any good social workers out there. And,
Oops.
you know, and I know there are some, because my wife's one of them. And I know Greg's one, but
From a structural point of view too on that question, if a case is on the investigation track versus the family assessment track, child protection investigation social workers have the ability to go out to a neutral setting, usually it's a school or a daycare setting, and interview the child and other child members of the family without notifying the parents about the interview, so they can interview the child in a neutral, hopefully safe environment. Beyond that, it's what Alicia and Naima were talking about, is the individual skills of the social worker to make a child feel comfortable. But the investigation track does allow for a non-parental consent interview at a private, neutral setting.
Okay.
well, we're getting late. I just want to share one more question that came in, and I think we have to wrap it up. But it is whether your parents had, experienced abuse that you know of that
Yes.
might have contributed to the situation.
Yes. So I can speak for me. I learned, to end my story, I left foster care at 17 and a half and got my own place. My dad and I went through a lot of counseling and rehabilitated our relationship. And then he died when I was 22 of a heart attack. And what I will say is that people can change. My dad did change. And yeah, you can definitely get help and things can change. I will say that.
From my side, yeah, my mom had suffered severe child abuse and sexual abuse from my understanding. But sadly, unlike Naima's dad, my mom had never sought help, and sadly into my late 20s, it still didn't end, and it moved on and progressed, and I don't know where she is anymore. And that's also a struggle, dealing with too, is not that it's my responsibility, but I do think like, who is her next victim, because when I moved out and my sister moved out, then she started projecting onto my sister's and I's dad. And then that got into legal scenarios as well. And then they finally separated. And then now we don't know where she is. And not that she couldn't have found help and gotten better. I think that can, that is a very, very likely possibility for many people if they know what their resources are and they have the right surrounding environment. It just didn't work out that way for my mom.
And so what I was going to say with counseling, though, if you can get a family there, that's when that question can get answered that you just asked. That's when I found out my dad did suffer child abuse from his dad, that when he came back from Vietnam, he was pretty abusive. But that didn't come out till the work started happening, because sometimes we know that men don't talk about their trauma all the time, especially parents. It's you know, it's not a common thing for a parent to sit down and talk about their trauma with their children, especially if they want to just let it go. So yeah, I believe a lot of parents that do abuse have been abused. Mine was. And that actually helped me to come to forgiveness, to understand what my dad went through as a boy, and then helped me to be super determined to break the cycle.
Yeah.
Mm.
Great.
What a great note to wrap up on. I want to thank both of you so much for sharing your stories. And it's, you know, I think it's even hard on us, you know, to kind of emotionally to hear them and hear your stories, but I think it's so healing as well. And again, I would say anybody who is interested in working with us between now and next year on getting legislation passed to kind of correct some of these things and protect children more than they are now, just you know where to reach us. And a couple people in the chat are already connected. So we'll be working with Naeem and Alicia and a bunch of other people between now and then, hopefully get some changes made.
Yep.
So thank you both so much. And you know,
Thanks.
some people who, you know, on the chat line as well. And again, 2 weeks from now, we'll have a panel of foster parents who will talk about the good, the bad, and the not so, you know, and the difficult as foster parents. So that should be a good panel as well. And people are just saying to thank you both for your stories and for sharing.
All right.
Thank
So
you all for joining and
Thank
listening.
you.
yeah.
And feel free, if you have any questions for me, anyone can reach out to me if you like. So
Same here.
Yeah, just connect with us and
yeah, connect with Richard.
Yeah, I'll share the email.
All right.
So, all right, well, I'm going to end it now, and thank you all for being here, and especially our two panelists.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon. Okay.
All right. Thanks. All right.